Hello and welcome to God in Film, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any parallels with gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm podcaster and hot dad at the nursery gate, Giles Gough.
And I'm Kidderminster's sexiest woman and suspiciously atheist RS teacher, Natalie Minaker.
And for this very special episode, we're looking at The Chosen, the show that seeks to depict the life of Jesus as seen through his apostles that is currently onto its third season. Now, Nat, I, like so many things, forced you into watching this. What did you think of this show?
I did enjoy it. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as you did.
No,
but I didn't like you less for making me watch it.
Which is impressive considering the amount of things I have made you watch and you like me less for it. Okay, I am clearly going to need somebody to meet me on my levels of enthusiasm for this show. So joining us today is the woman who swans in every flipping time we do something she's interested in the podcast and then disappears like a ghost when it's not.
Hello, it's me, Claire, Giles' wife.
Hello, Claire.
Hello, Nat. Nice to be here.
Yay.
Hello, sweetheart. So this show is a bit of an unusual choice for us for a podcast episode because normally I'd like to know pretty much everything there is to know about a show before we decide to do an episode on it. However, every Easter, what we're trying to do is do at least one episode on something that is explicitly a God film, a Christian film or Christian show. So I had a bit of a rush to get this one done. So full disclosure, we'll only be focusing on The Chosen Season 1 in this episode. We haven't even seen the special Christmas episode. We've literally only seen what's on Netflix. But hopefully that gives us an opportunity to revisit it at a later date. Claire, what did you think of this show?
I really love it, I've got to be honest. I think partly probably the reason why we're such big fans is the novelty value of getting an actually quality Christian production.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Which does not happen that often, I'm going to be honest.
Yes. no
so
wobbly
weird.
Sets and hammy acting. No one deciding to use the King James version of the Bible to get their lines from.
As someone that has experienced quite a lot of Christian media of varying kinds, the quality is variable.
What's interesting, I think, there's some very 21st century phrases in there sometimes when it says things like when Simon is saying to his wife Eden, I've got this, and you're like, that's a very modern particular phrase. But I think for me, with any kind of Christian art, you have to do something that will help you relate to it in some way, shape, or form, help to relate to the audience that you're talking about. So it doesn't bother me so much that a first century Jew would say something like that. I think it's interesting. You can sometimes hear just a very slight tonal shift in the language when Jesus is talking and it's been something that's been scripted by the script writers versus
I found that.
something that's actually taken directly from scripture.
I can't say I picked up on that, honestly, but I'm not as discerning as you are.
Yeah, I think I did, but I think partly that's because there's so many passages in the New Testament that I'm intimately familiar with from having taught them. I'm like, I know this bit.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. And there is a kind of an inherent formality sometimes, I think, that comes with quoting things directly from scripture that just sort of seems to happen. But like I say, the quality of this I was incredibly impressed by, especially given that so many Christian things tend to be low budget, not especially good acting, and incredibly cheesy. It's just really refreshing to see something that actually draws me in and makes me want to watch it and that doesn't make me cringe all the way through it.
We've got a Christ depicted here who is doing simple things like making toys for kids and who is just doing simple things like turning up at a wedding because his mum wants him to, and he's so gentle and he's so loving and he's so relevant.
I tell you what I really did like is I love the characterization of Jesus, because I think often when you read the Bible, the text is so formal, and in previous depictions of Jesus, they tend to, because obviously you've kind of got the human and the divine in one. And I think previous depictions often really focus on the divine and they make Jesus this kind of otherworldly being, which obviously that's part of him, but he was also just a dude. And what I really liked was that he just seemed really nice and friendly. And I think, like, even if he wasn't someone who was able to perform miracles, you could still see how he would get a following regardless of the miracles. Like, he just seemed to be someone who, like, I want to sit down and have a chat with him. Like, I've had quite a hard day today, and I feel like a chat with Jesus would probably help. And that's coming from an atheist. So I want him to hug me and tell me everything will be all right.
I know, right?
So obviously we wanted to find out more about this show. So what we did was we sent a reporter to Texas, where it's filmed, to interview the showrunners and the stars of the show. And by we sent, what I mean is I found a journalist who had already been there and done it, and just asked him if he wanted to be on the show to tell us all about it. And I did, and he said yes. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Sam Hales. I'm the editor of Premier Christianity magazine and the editorial director for Premier.
Sam, it is such a joy to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on board today. We really appreciate it.
It's great to be here.
So, for those that don't know, and let's be honest, that was me like a month or two ago, what can you tell us about The Chosen?
The Chosen is the first ever multi-season portrayal of the life of Jesus. So you'll know, Giles, there have been many films made about the life of Jesus Christ, some good, some not so good, perhaps. But there's never been a whole series. So a TV series, each episode's about an hour long. And what's really interesting about The Chosen is because it's a multi-season portrayal, they can do, I think, 7 seasons.
Oh, really?
It means that you can go into some depth about Jesus and about some of the characters. So you don't just find out about Jesus, you find out about how people with very different backgrounds view Jesus at the time. Yeah. And the whole show is really constructed around this one word, plausibility. Yeah. So although it's being faithful to scripture, it's asking that question, is it plausible that this might have happened? And filling in lots of interesting, often biographical detail that we don't get explicitly from the Gospels, but I think for the most part is very plausible.
Absolutely. I found it fascinating. I also think bringing in 7 seasons of it, or bringing the fact that it is a multiple series thing, really brings in a layer of tension that I wouldn't have felt before. When it's the Passion of the Christ, you know that something really bad is going to happen to Jesus for the next 2 hours or however long you're watching it. I find myself almost a bit anxious to watch it sometimes, because I'm like, I know where this story's going, and yes, I know it has a happy ending, but I know it has a really gruesome climax to it, effectively. So it does make you quite anxious about a story that is 2,000 years old. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those stories where you, as a Christian, you know exactly what's going to happen. You know where it's all going. But yeah, it's going to take a while to get there. A few more years yet until we get to the crucifixion and the resurrection. And there's such a huge fan following of The Chosen that those who are really into it are already asking what happens when. And I think it's 7 seasons. It may be 6, right? But you know what I mean? It's some time. Yeah. People already asking, well, what are you going to do after that? I had the great privilege of traveling to Texas, where they filmed The Chosen, meeting the director, meeting some of the cast and the crew. And I did ask them as much as I possibly could, what are you going to do when The Chosen wraps up? And they really refused to give any kind of details at all. If I had to guess, I think once they've done, obviously, crucifixion, resurrection, it wouldn't surprise me if they then start going into Acts, because I think Acts logically follows on from that time.
I mean, it is the sequel, isn't it?
Exactly. That's my best guess, but no one's stated that officially. I couldn't get them to, even off the record, they would not tell me.
Okay, so I'm up to date with the first. Like I said, I'm exceptionally late to the dance on this show. I'm up to date with the first series. You've seen the second series. You were on set for some of the third series filming. In the most spoiler-free way possible, what can we expect in season 2 and season 3, if that's possible?
Yeah, it's a really good question. A couple of things. First thing I'd say is the production. The production goes up a notch in a big way for season 2. So if you've only seen season 1, I don't know about you, Giles, it looked quite dark in places, that just the lighting, it didn't quite work for me. What did you think?
Essentially, the vast majority of it is people talking in rooms, which from a director's standpoint is the easiest thing to film. The most logistically complex thing I've seen so far is the man being winched down into through the roof in to see Jesus. But I think the thing for me is the character study is so engaging that you don't notice it. Like when it comes to a Christian production, how can I put it? The shonkiness is built in, where you're kind of expecting it to be mad. And so for me, even though I can see that it's just people talking in fields or talking in rooms, it's so well written, it's so well performed. I'm not conscious of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had the misfortune of watching a few Christian films in my time, and most of them are pretty awful from a production standpoint. And that's what is refreshing about The Chosen. So even season 1, it's good. I'd say it's good. I would describe season 2 as significantly better on production values. And I think what's exciting is Dallas Jenkins, the director, when I interviewed him about this, he said, we've done it again for season 3. Wow. It goes up a notch again. And so when I went to Texas, one of the things I did was toured the film set they've built from scratch. And you're literally walking around a village of Capernaum, and you're walking around, sizable kind of area. And you're like, well, this is where Simon Peter's house is. And over there you can see the synagogue, and here's the market, and the fruit and veg on the market looks very real, but of course it's not. So I was very impressed touring around that film set, that they have it's a purpose-built film set just for The Chosen. But it's even next to this lake in Texas, which is obviously doubling up as the Sea of Galilee for their purposes. And so it's very, very professional. So I suppose the first thing I'd say in terms of season 2 and then season 3 is the production levels are always going up. But I would want to emphasize that if you are someone who's really into your films and your TV, and you are frustrated sometimes at the lack of quality Christian filmmaking, I would stress that The Chosen is not that. Yeah. Even from the very first episode, I would argue it's a significantly higher standard than some of the other productions that I've personally seen. So that's the first thing, production. I think the second thing is just what you said, Giles, about character development. That just carries on. And really, I suppose each episode can be quite hard-hitting and quite emotional as you watch a different character interact with Jesus. And I think what I love about that is the feedback that you hear time and time again from people who watch The Chosen. People often say things like, I watched The Chosen with my teenage son, my teenage daughter, and they really like watching it. And then when the episode finishes, they say, Mum, Dad, was that really in the Bible? And it's actually, when people say this is sending my teenage kids back to the scriptures to check if it really happened that way, I think they're doing something right, because I think not many things can do that. Yeah. So, and then it's impossible to kind of really deal with the spoiler question because, as you say, it is based on scripture. But there were things even from season 1 that I found kind of fascinating. This idea that perhaps before Jesus started his official ministry, might he have gathered a small group together? What would that community have looked like? And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that in season 2 there's a fascinating episode that really they take just one verse from scripture, from the Gospels, where it says that the verse says something like, and all in the local area who needed healing came to Jesus and he healed them. So there's one line in the Gospels. They take that one line and then they imagine what would that look like? Because I don't know about you, I just read that verse and think, okay, fine. But what would that have meant if everyone in the local area heard there was someone who could heal them? How long would the queue be for a start? And how would Jesus have set that up? Because he wouldn't have been on some stage. Yeah. Where would he have set himself? Would there have been a healing tent? What would his prayers have looked like? What would the disciples... So there's all these kind of questions that we don't get specific answers to in the Gospels, but the filmmakers have had to imagine what the answers to some of those questions might be, and it's turned into, I thought, a really astonishing episode that imagines what that queue would be like and how Jesus would have healed all those people in one day.
100%, definitely. So what is it about this show in particular that has had such an impact? Because it is really quite... a runaway success, isn't it?
Yeah, and what's unusual about it is actually the funding model. And so the funding model of The Chosen, it's entirely crowd-funded. And what that means is they've relied on, I think, mainly Christians around the world to donate towards the production costs. And the production costs are very significant. We're talking millions of dollars. But I think because it is so well done, I don't think they've struggled too much to get the investment, which I find very encouraging from a Christian point of view. I think as we as Christians, if we can do things well, God will provide the money. is my analysis of it. So it's a very unusual way of making TV, and it's broken some barriers, I think. According to the producers of The Chosen, they're saying, other people in kind of TV Hollywood circles are now looking at this as a legitimate future funding model for other things. The idea that if you produce something decent, the audience might actually want to get behind it. And so that's been quite unusual, is the way this has come about is entirely through crowdfunding.
That's fantastic. Listen, Sam, thank you so much for talking to us today. I really appreciate it, and taking your time out of your schedule. It's going to make such a big difference.
Thanks so much, Giles. It's been a pleasure to chat. And if people are interested in my trip to Texas to have a look around The Chosen, I have written an article all about it, and you can read that at premierchristianity.com/The Chosen.
Nice little plug there, very smooth. We'll put a link in the show notes for the episode. Nicely done, sir. Thank you very much. Hey guys, it's Editing Giles here. Just stopping by to tell you that if you go to www.patreon.com/God in Film podcast and sign up to our Bishop Waller Bridge tier, you can hear additional interviews and special bonus episodes like our God in Music and God in Gaming episodes. And now, if you absolutely can't wait to hear more from us, you can hear the next episode on Superman before everybody else if you just sign up to our Archbishop Spike Lee tier. And now, back to the show. Okay, Nat, Claire, that was Sam Hales, editor of Premier Christianity. What did you think?
I am really jealous that he got to go and visit the set. And I'm actually, can I just say, really surprised. I didn't think it was filmed in Texas.
No, me neither. That surprised me too.
I was like, oh, they went to Galilee. Who knew that Texas was so verdant and sandy? No, that was really interesting.
Yeah, I was talking off mic with Sam, and he told me about some of the criticism that Dallas Jenkins had been facing. I think the thing that surprised me about it was finding out that people had been giving Dallas Jenkins a hard time for heresy and
oh really?
And criticizing him for not getting everything exactly right and not being completely biblical.
This does not surprise me in the slightest.
Do you know what? Sometimes I think some people just have to fill column inches. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think all you've got to do is do like a historical fiction of Jesus, which I guess is essentially what it is, really, isn't it? Yeah. Fiction. Like if you're going to put any words in the mouth of Jesus that aren't literally in the Bible, you're always going to get people that are going to come with that argument.
Well, any kind of Christian fiction as well, because The Shack got absolutely slammed for it as well.
Oh yeah, big time.
So anything short of the Passion of the Christ, and even then that has one or two inaccuracies in it. So haters going to hate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're always going to get that if you have any kind of interpretation that's not literally direct words from the Bible. There's like people struggle to realize that stuff is fiction and that you can use your imagination, and that's okay.
But it's funny because like I've only seen Passion of the Christ once when, again, Giles took me to the cinema to see it.
Did I do that?
Yeah.
Awesome. I have been working on you for a long time.
I know, and yet I'm still an atheist, so work hard, Giles. For now. But no, my favourite bit in Passion of the Christ is something that was added in, which is Jesus inventing the dining room table.
Yes, I love that. That's one of my favourite bits.
I'm pretty sure that's not in the New Testament. But
no, it's not. And this is the thing. This show, so far, is basically all of that. You know, that scene of like what happens before.
And that's so lovely because partly I think because the Bible is in translation, you do miss so much of the personality, and that's what you need injected back into it, and that's what this does, and it's really nice to have that.
Like I said, the characterization of Jesus, he you know, when you read him in the Bible, the New Testament I find an interesting, obviously it's a religious text, but as a work of literature, I've always found it slightly lacking. It's like, and then they went here, and then they did this, and he said, and she said, and it's like, you know, use an adjective occasionally. And this is...
Wait, did you not read John?
Yeah, well, John is just like pure poetry, but it can be quite difficult to actually understand what point he's making. He's got the wordiness of the Pauline epistles as well. It's just like, dudes, get to the point. So, you know, that Saint Paul, he is what I would call a waffler. He is somebody that if I was marking his letters as if they were an essay, I'd be writing on the side, repetition, get to the point. But no, this is what I really like about the Chosen, is it's like it really humanises these figures that don't really get a lot of, I don't know if you call it airtime, page time. It's like they get a few lines of dialogue, and you have to read through between the lines for like who they actually are, and that's 100%. What I did really like about it.
It reminds me of that line from in Dogma where Chris Rock is playing Rufus, the 13th Apostle, and it says about how it went from Jesus being 12 years old to being 30, and it's like, that is some pretty poor storytelling.
Yeah.
and this is effectively trying to like fill in some of those gaps. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think I've been feeling recently reading the Bible, like there's so much that you miss not getting Jesus's tone when he says something to someone. There's things that he says to people and you're like, oh, depending on how he said that, it could be taken so differently. So it's just nice to see a depiction of something, which obviously I know is not like, it's someone's interpretation of it, but it's just nice to see it in flesh, as it were.
Yes. 100%. The word made flesh.
Now it's time for finding the faith in the film.
Da 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 da. We didn't rehearse that. It's just become like a Pavlovian conditioned response now, isn't it?
When people don't do the sound, I start to feel very uncomfortable throughout the entire thing. You know?
So you could literally come into my house in the middle of the night, wake me from my sleep and go, finding the faith in the film. And I go, da 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 da. Why are you in my house, Giles?
Well, I mean, I did do that one time, you know. Yeah. So there's I'll be honest with you, a lot of this episode is going to be me and Claire just obsessively fangirling over this show. And I'm fully ready to embrace that. But there's one or two things I'm going to pick out before we get to that I thought was interesting. So, do you remember the first episode? We talked about the first episode being a little bit on the slow side. And it's all told from Mary's perspective. Mary Magdalene's perspective, but if you remember, she's not credited as that at the beginning of the show. Can you remember what she's called?
Lilith.
Yeah, Lilith. Okay, so Lilith is one of those kind of characters that, you know, we talk about Christian headcanon and Gilesian headcanon.
Yeah,
Lilith is Judaic headcanon. Basically, she sort of stems from a bit from. Interestingly, a bit of Mesopotamian mythology. So Lilith, also spelled Lilitu or Litus, she's theorized to be the first wife of Adam, which is mental. But do you know why? Okay, this is going to sound insane, but do you know why she's thought to be the first wife of Adam?
Well, I mean, she turns up as a character in the Sandman comics. So,
I'm going to save you some time. She turns up as a character in pretty much flipping everything. Lucifer and Supernatural.
Well, Lucifer's obviously Sandman universe, so same Lilith. Yeah.
But it's Sandman adjacent. So this is one of those things that comes down to just that the way Genesis is written could be interpreted a few ways. So what it comes down to is that in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, the creation of man and woman is described twice.
Yeah, my year 9s notice that when I do it with them.
So instead of somebody just going, okay, somebody's just mentioned that in passing and now they're going into it in more detail, some Jewish scholars believe that was two separate events. So
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
So in Genesis 1:27, it goes, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So that's Genesis 1, verse 27. And interestingly, that is the first bit of poetry in Genesis. So that makes it also the first bit of poetry in the Torah and in the Bible. And then we've got a slightly longer description in Genesis 2:20-24. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. And I think that was a missed opportunity. Because can you imagine, like, Adam having, like, a sort of Disney-style, like, parrot on his shoulder? Or just...
Yeah,
just
you can't tell me that he didn't have some mates, among the animals.
Yeah. Like a favourite lion or something. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called Woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." Now, that last bit, verse 24, we will be getting into that in more detail, and Jesus quoting it in our Eternals episode, so just wait for that one. Interestingly, I think in some translations, it suggests that he took the man's side rather than the man's rib.
That's fascinating.
It was fascinating. Anyway, I can get distracted like nobody's business. We're here, we're talking about Lilith. So, like I say, there was these two descriptions of man and woman being created, right? And then somebody goes, "Well, hey, what was the first one? The first wife." And then we get this Lilith, and Lilith becomes this kind of primordial she-demon. Again, as you said, similar to what we talked about in Sandman.
Yeah.
She's banished from the Garden of Eden for not obeying Adam, because women, you should do what you're told. Know your place.
Women, know your place.
I'm starting to see how the story came about.
And she's thought to be mentioned in late antiquity, so quite late on. That we're talking like, 3rd to 7th century AD?
Okay.
In Jewish mythology sources from like 500 AD onwards. Now, Lilith appears in various concepts and localities that give partial descriptions of her. She's mentioned in the Babylonian Talmud. The Talmud is another kind of holy book of the Bible, and it's more like, if you imagine you've got the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the first 5 books, I think. The Talmud is like a collection of like commentaries and sort of teachings from rabbis and stuff like that. There's a reference to like the Jerusalem Talmud, which is because it was all oral it was all oral traditions, right? So there's an earlier one called the Jerusalem Talmud where somebody kind of went, "Guys, do you know what? I think we should probably write this all down."
Yeah.
And then there's the later one in the Babylonian Talmud. So anyway, I'm getting off track because interestingly, I know I've said she's complete headcanon, but she is actually mentioned in Isaiah. Or rather, more accurately, she's mentioned in some versions of Isaiah. Isaiah 34:14. There's a reference to a Lilith. So if I read out the NIV, Isaiah 34:14. "Desert creatures will meet with hyenas, and wild goats will bleat to each other. There the night creatures will also lie down and find for themselves places of rest." Whereas if we look in the Amplified Bible, it'll say, "The creatures of the desert will encounter jackals, and the hairy goat will call to its kind indeed. Lilith, brackets, night demon, will settle there and find herself a place to rest." So honestly, if you look at all the different translations of this particular passage, you can find so many different versions. I think the King James even refers to satyrs at one point. So it is just full on crazy. So as time goes on, Lilith kind of, you know what it's like, she kind of gets mixed in with other mythology. So qualities similar to the sirens in Greek mythology. She's also sort of compared to being thought of as like a succubus, which is a demon that seduces men. So I think when we think about the weight of all that particular nickname, it seems so incredibly cruel to give that to Mary. We see in like a flashback, she's basically raped by a Roman soldier, and there's some suggestion as to whether she had to turn to prostitution as a result. And when you give her a name like Lilith, not only does it dehumanize her, but it puts the responsibility for any sexual encounter she has solely on her. Do you know what I mean? As if the men have nothing to do with it.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. I mean, I guess it also relates to the like the demon possession side of things, but it's the fact that they've chosen that particular, you know, she's meant to be kind of a seducer kind of character, that they've chosen that particular one for her, which does seem very cruel.
Do they, I can't remember from watching the episode, is it made clear, is that a name that's given to her, or is it a name she's chosen for herself?
I can't picture anybody choosing that name for themselves, particularly in like first century Judea,
but
Israel.
you know,
like I know obviously, like with our sort of 20th and 21st century hats on, the name Lilith has kind of been reclaimed as being like a sort of like powerful sort of female figure, particularly in sort of like pagan circles and stuff like that. But in this particular period, I don't think that a person would choose to give himself that nickname.
What I
Do you know what I mean?
like if she has already become possessed by demons at that point, it could be a name that's like a warning, like keep away from me.
That's interesting.
A way of kind of like, well, do you know what? I'm clearly a bad person. I'm gonna lean into it. I'm gonna go all the way, and I can't be saved. So I might as well give myself the name Lilith, so at least people know what to expect.
Yeah, that's interesting. Or the other way of looking at it is with the sort of spiritual aspect on. If we think of Lilith as an actual demon, it could be the actual demon Lilith is sort of.
That's the name. Yeah, the name of the demon. Yeah. Also, if she is engaging in sex work, she's probably going to want to use an alias as well. So it could be that she chose that as her alias because she doesn't want to use her real name doing that kind of work.
Yeah,
I did love the end of that episode though. I did not see that come in when he just was like, Mary. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And I didn't realise the Magdalene was of Magdala. Which...
Oh, did you not?
No. I just assumed it was a family name, but no, I guess it does make sense.
Yeah. So at this point there is more Marys than you can shake a stick at. You know,
too many Marys.
It's like.
They're all Marys, Johns and Jameses.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the amount of women we know called Sarah or
Emma.
or Emma or Gemma, flipping Gemmas all left, right and centre, you know?
Yeah, Gemma's falling out of cupboards and
yeah.
under the bed.
So there's Mary, there's Maria, there's Mariam, there's all kinds of things. So you do need to distinguish them from one another.
Yeah.
Now Magdala, I think, is a fishing village. I might just be imagining that from the film Magdalene, but yeah, we can come back to that. It's almost links into just how they have to give nicknames for people because so many people have got the same names, like Big James and Little James, you know?
Yeah.
Speaking of giving names, there was something in, I think, episode 3 that you were particularly interested in.
Yeah, so episode 3 in particular is the episode with the children, where Jesus, a couple of them kind of sneak into his camp, which I absolutely loved that episode partly because you're so used to these days, you're watching a program, you see a couple of children creeping into a lone man's camp and start interacting with him, and you instantly go, oh no, it's going to be that kind of horrible show. And it's not like that's not referenced that this is dangerous for them to be kind of talking to a strange man, but then it's so pure. It's so lovely. And Jesus gets to practice his ministry and at the same time just hang out with some great kids and have a nice time.
I tell you what, man, he is so patient. Having organised a birthday party for a dozen 8-year-olds last week, my tolerance for large groups of small children is... Jesus puts me to shame. I would not. I'm 10 minutes. I'm done.
But
I teach teenagers.
The thing I love about that episode is that it is a microcosm of what it's like to follow Jesus and what we're like compared to him. We're all the little kid, like sort of tugging at his robe, saying, "But, what God."
What does that mean?
What about this? What does this word mean? Like, can I go over there and do that? No, you can't do that. But why? Because if you do, you hurt yourself. But what if I don't hurt myself? You will hurt yourself. But, can I do it anyway? You know what I mean?
Oh, so you've met my daughter then.
It summed up the perfect, like, metaphor for what it's like following God, and I loved that.
I didn't pick up on that, but no, that's really obvious.
Yeah, and the fact that he respects children as well, I think, is so important. Like, in our culture, and probably in that culture then, children don't get a huge amount of respect and aren't particularly listened to or paid attention to a lot of the time, and are seen as more of an annoyance, and he really values them and what they have to say.
How many children actually turn up in the New Testament? Because there's references to like groups of children, but are there any like named children or children who get...
You wouldn't. It's the same with the feeding the 5,000. It's like feeding the 5,000 men, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to remember, in the Roman world, a child, so many of them aren't actually surviving infancy.
Yeah.
That I think it's only after like their first year, or maybe even like 3 years,
I think, usually,
5 years before they're even sort of granted like status of being a person, you know? It's like, oh, right, okay, well, looks you've survived. It looks like you're going to stick around.
Yeah, so you're talking about names, and I picked up on he calls one of the kids Joshua the Brave. And I really loved that it seemed like he gave him the name that he needed rather than the name that reflected him in that moment, which I thought was really lovely and kind of made me think, well, maybe that's what he does with other people, because he gives people kind of names or nicknames, and maybe it's the name that they need rather than the name that actually reflects them at that time, like Simon being Peter the Rock.
Yeah, this is the point I was gonna get to. In that moment, it works as a joke, doesn't it? Oh, you know, Joshua the Brave, you know. But similarly with Simon being named Peter, so Petros, like rock or stone, and then he says to sort of Peter, "You're the rock on which I'll build my church." Peter is
flaky AF.
Flaky AF. We've talked about this. So like, Peter's my favourite apostle. I bring him up a lot, and he's flaky AF. But again, this is how Jesus is, and what it's like when you're an omnipotent being. You can make a joke that actually turns out to be completely 100% true and accurate. You know. The next thing that really sort of jumped out at us was the next episode, which is the wedding gift, the 5th episode.
I like that. As one of my favourite bits of the New Testament, because I could, in my mind, I always just picture it as like this Mary kind of going, Jesus, do your thing, and Jesus being like, oh, Mom, do I have to? It's like, come on, you're showing me up.
The thing I enjoyed about it was where he turns up, and it's the mother of the groom is clearly a family friend to them. I love that thing, that relationship you have with people who are friends of your parents, who are almost like sort of aunties and uncles, but not quite. And so it's a bit like, oh, how is Jesus doing? Oh, he's doing fine. You know, he's doing okay. You know, and I think the thing I was thinking about was they obviously tweak it a bit by putting Thomas there.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Things. Now, obviously, Thomas is if the character I relate to the most is Peter, you know, like the apostle who's a bit flaky, sort of like bends in the wind, and is a bit like, I like to think of myself like that. Thomas is the disciple that you are most like now.
You literally beat me to it.
Because
I will own that.
Because like, we call him Doubting Thomas, which I think is unfair, because I think Thomas, the rational empiricist, seems to actually work a lot better.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Whenever he pops up in lessons, I'm always like, I don't think asking for a bit of evidence and clarification is a bad thing.
Yeah.
I am a full-blown Thomas. 100%. I will freely admit, and I don't. Yeah. I see Thomas as just being the one who's like, I can imagine him like, okay, guys, can we just take a second? I mean, I'm not saying you're lying. You're asking me to believe a lot here. Yeah. So
I'm taking a lot of faith here. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this one just tiny little scene just before he does the miracle where Thomas says to him, from the directions you have provided, I see no logical solution to the problem. And Jesus, you could almost see him roll his eyes, and he just says, it's going to be like that sometimes, Thomas.
Yeah, I love that.
First of all, at that point, I'm not sure if he's actually been introduced to him by name at that point.
Yeah.
But just the way it says it's going to be like that sometimes, it presupposes that Thomas is going to join him. Do you know what I mean? It's not saying, he's not doing the follow me like he does with others. It's just like, yeah, you're...
You're going to find that a lot.
Yeah, you're going to say this a lot, and it's going to be only a little bit tiring, you know?
What is that? There's that moment. I don't know if it's in the last episode. Yeah, Jesus says something like, if you want to have this disagreement every time I do something unexpected, we're going to be here a while.
He says it's going to be quite annoying, you know.
Yeah.
Then at one point, Jesus puts his hand after the miracle's actually been performed. Jesus puts his hand into the stone jar, and some of the wine trickles through his fingers, and it's red wine. So it's foreshadowing the crucifixion to come, and the fact that like blood will be running down his hands and running through his fingers later on.
Yeah, in the dark light, it just looked a lot like blood dripping off his hands. I just thought that was a really
I didn't pick up on that. No, that's nice. Bit of symbolism.
From a filmmaking perspective, I absolutely loved that. I adored that. You know,
I found really interesting in that scene how Jesus performed the miracle in private, that he kind of ushered everyone out the room. And I wonder, I don't know, like, I was trying to wonder, like, what was his purpose there? Was it to kind of have room for doubt? Because if they saw him in the room doing it, then it's like, we have witnessed it. There's no rational explanation. It has to be a miracle. Whereas him being in the room with water and then no one seeing how it turns into wine, it's almost like, look guys, something's happened, but you're gonna have to just have faith in it. And the fact that Thomas is there as well, I don't know, maybe it's like maybe it's like, you know, you can't always have absolute 100% proof of something. You have to sometimes take things on faith.
I would.
I think there could be a bit of that. I also get the impression at this point that he's really trying to be low key because he's not ready for everything to blow up yet.
Yeah.
And you see that quite often in the Bible. He'll perform a miracle and he'll say, "Just don't tell anyone right now."
Yeah.
I think he's trying to put off the time when everything just goes mad and he can't move for crowds because it's just not time yet.
And that's the thing I found was interesting, was that to me that just seemed like the human side of things. That I see what you're saying about like be able to give room for doubt, but honestly, they're only just outside the other door. If anybody could believe that Jesus has somehow lifted these big stone jars, replaced them with wine that just come, frankly, for me, that requires more faith, you know.
It's something I teach with when I do miracles with my year 7s. A little like thought activity we do is what could be a rational explanation that doesn't let it be a miracle. And like some of the stuff the kids come up with is quite funny. It's like, well, he had like some like powder in his pocket that he added to the water and it made it taste like wine, or that like he just found some fats that they'd forgotten about and stuff like that.
Yeah. To me, this just I feel like I'm going to provide a really boring explanation, but to me this just feels like the human side of things. Not that Jesus is doubting himself necessarily, but performing an actual miracle, even if you know that this is your destiny, you still probably don't want to watch people doing it in the same way that we don't invite audiences to watch rehearsals. You don't run a marathon for the first time by being at the marathon. You do some things in private first until you're ready to show it to the outside world.
I think that's a really good point. Also, it's the first time he's done this, and I guess maybe this is the first miracle he's performing. He knows this is the start of something. He knows this is the start of it, and he just wants to take a minute with God in private. To be like, okay, let's just do this one together on our own before I have to start facing all of the people.
And also, it's earlier than he expected as well. I think, how can I put this? I think, okay, if you know what's coming from his perspective, if you know that you're going to start yourself on a path which is ultimately going to get you killed, and you know there's a purpose, and you know there's a reason for it, and you know that is God's plan, that's fine. But for me, I would just want to savor the last few moments of my old life. You know,
I can imagine that.
This is a terrible example, but do you remember when we moved house, when we moved from the flat? to the house we're in now. And the reason we did that was because we needed a bigger place if we were going to have a kid. And for me, that leaving that house symbolized that it was no longer just going to be Jigga and Clash.
Yeah.
Hip, cool, 30-something, 20-somethings who were like the hottest married couple. But it's like, okay, we're going to move into being parents. And hey, we were cool.
Claire was.
Yeah. And it's just that, it's that sadness. And again, this is me reading into it. But I think sometimes it's like a reluctance to leave an old part of your life, even if you know you've got to go into the new part of your life and it's good and it's proper and the rest of it. Leaving that part behind might be
it's hard,
you know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
The next thing I want to talk about was indescribable compassion. The next episode where they see Jesus heal a leper. You know, you see what the leper's going through, how he's absolutely treated like as an outcast, and he just says, "Rabbi, if you are willing, please heal me." And then a woman sees him do that, and then there's become like an impromptu thing around the house where literally it's like a town hall kind of question and answer session about this. And they just need she's seen that this man can heal them. They've brought their friend, and first of all, you know you've got good friends when they're really willing to rip up a stranger's roof for you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was before you came along. My friends were the most important relationships I had in my life, and you're like, you really want people to commit some property damage for you if it's necessary, you know. And she says to him, "If you are willing, Rabbi, I know you can do this." And that, how can I put this? First of all, I really like the humility attached to it. Secondly, as somebody who has I don't know what the best way to describe it, like a chronic health condition and something that I've lived with for nearly 30 years, it's the "if you are willing, please." And the thing you find is like, even if he doesn't heal me, he's still God.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And
it's
that's
not
flipping hard sometimes.
it's incredibly hard, especially it's even hard when you're seeing other people being getting miraculous healings and stuff like that, you know. But it's not cupboard love. It's not you do this for me and I'll follow you. It's like, no, you're God. You are the only game in town, you know.
Yeah.
And just the look on the fella's face after he's been healed and he's walking away, and there's practically a riot sort of like coming in around him, but he's just walking away, like using his legs, which he hasn't used in so long, and he's the tears of happiness running down his face, you know.
It really, because like in the New Testament, miracles are 10 a penny and they're just happening all the time, and you forget the human impact of it. And what the impact must be for that person walking away that's just had their life completely changed.
The last thing I wanted to talk about was the last episode where he meets the woman in the well in Samaria. And
the woman at the well, not in the well, lovely. That would be a different
That would
story.
be way more fun though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You know? Help me, I'm in a well. Oh, would you know? So he meets a woman at the well, and he's like, I'm really thirsty. Could you please give me some water?
He never does get that drink.
He never gets that drink. You know, and for some reason, she's able to tell that he's a Jew, and it's just by looking at him. And there's all the sort of tension between the Jews and the Samaritans and Samaritans, sorry, and just all that stuff. And he's able to cut through that. And I love the way the thing for me that is the heart of the show is the way Jesus can make people feel.
Yeah.
Jesus can make you feel like he is, like you're the most special person in the room. And I want to talk about a friend of mine who's probably one of the most Christ-like people I know. Her name's Helen Allen, right? And back in 2011, she was Nurse of the Year. And
wow.
And we'd been in the same church, but we weren't really in the same circles. You know, she was like raising kids, and I was like desperately trying to find a girlfriend, so we didn't kind of intersect that much. But in 2012, she got nominated to run with the Olympic torch.
Wow, that's amazing.
And when the Olympics came up, the torch obviously was going everywhere. It even went through Beaumaris back in Anglesey, which is Anglesy's where I'm from. And because I was working that day, I couldn't go and see the torch coming through, like a place I spent most of my time, a lot of time growing up. So the next best thing I could do was go to Chester and watch somebody who was basically an acquaintance at this point, just run through the town carrying the torch for the thing, you know. And I took my camera and I thought, I can get some photos for church, it'd be good publicity, blah blah blah. And we're there, we watch it. She runs through, the entire crowd is cheering as Helen runs in with this torch, and they do the handover. The next person starts running, and she's she sort of gets to relax at that point, and all her family are coming up and they're hugging her and all the rest of it. And then afterwards, Helen sends me a text message saying, "Giles, thank you so much for being there. It really made my day." I was like, okay. And I thought she was just being, you know, she's had all her loved ones around her. All her friends and family have come to cheer her on. She has had like the literal city of Chester cheering her on with every step. But she says, "You coming really made my day." Yeah. And I thought, okay, well, Helen's nice. She's a very positive person. She's very effusive. She's like the encourager in chief. I thought she's just saying that to be nice. And I picked her up on this one time a few years later. And she said, and I was like, you said, yeah, and I said, no, don't be ridiculous. I mean, like, yeah, okay, those people were cheering for me, but they were going to cheer for anybody. And my family, well, you know, they pretty much had to be there, didn't they? You didn't have to be there, and you came all that way to see me, you know? And she just made me feel so important and so special. And for me, I think that's just a glimpse, like just through a glass darkly, of how Jesus can make each person feel. When he says, you know, I came to Samaria just to see you, and he says that to the woman, and it just makes her feel amazing and feel so seen, you know.
Are you saying that? I wanted to bring up a little thing that happens when Jesus speaks to Simon's wife, Eden, I think her name is. And just says something along the lines of, "I see you, and I see the sacrifices you're making, and I want you to know that it's important." And I nearly teared up at that point, because like the amount that women then must have had to do that was just completely unthanked and unseen. I can't imagine. And I mean, there's a great deal that women do now that's unthanked and unseen, but then it must have been even worse. So I really, really loved that he just saw her and just let her know that he saw her. And like, we know that women followed him a lot, and were just as taken by him as the men were that followed him. Obviously, we hear less about it, but we know that women did follow him, and that women were among a lot of the first disciples and the first members of the church. And so he must have given them a reason. And this really does it for me, that I really can imagine that he just saw women in a way that they weren't used to being noticed. And made them feel important and valuable as much as the men were, and that just really struck me and stuck with me. I have 3 things that I'd like to just mention. First of all, Autistic Matthew. I love him. I mean, like, I googled it because I remember I was watching it. I was like, hang on a second, this characterization, I recognise this. And I googled it, and it was obviously a very deliberate choice. And the who's the guy that made, is it Dallas?
Dallas Jenkins.
Yeah, so he said he wanted to show that, like, the kingdom of God is for everyone. And I think that is, you know, you obviously autism has always existed. It wasn't just invented in the 90s, which some people kind of argue. But and like, of course you would have had autistic people back then, and of course they would have ended up probably working as tax collectors if they were quite good at maths, which a lot of autistic people are, not wanting to generalise, but it is part of the stereotype. And so it was quite nice to see that.
Do you know, the other thing that jumped out at me from that was Simon Peter's reaction to when when Jesus tells Matthew, "Follow me."
Yeah.
And I think the thing we so often forget is that Jesus isn't aligned to any party political view. Jesus wants everybody to follow him. So there will be followers of Jesus who you don't like and don't agree with. They might even turn up at your church wearing a MAGA hat, but Jesus loves them just the same, you know? And it's a challenge for us to love them just as much as Jesus loved them, and that's what we're called to.
My second point something that popped into my head actually while you were talking, and I didn't really notice it until I've just thought about it now, but how people don't call Jesus teacher, they call him rabbi. And then with the Nicodemus being made into such a big character, I think one thing I did quite like about this is that, unlike other Christian dramas, it doesn't shy away from the fact that this started off as a Jewish religious movement, and it kind of embraces that this Christianity did become obviously a distinct religion, but it has its roots incredibly deeply in Judaism. And I like that that is reflected here, that Jesus is Jewish and his followers were Jewish and they call him rabbi, and I quite liked that.
When people say Jesus was Jewish, I always feel like that phrase should come with a caveat, because obviously Jesus was culturally Jewish, Jesus knew his Torah, all the rest of it, but Jesus was the Son of God, and that trumps literally everything else. Do you know what I mean?
It's true, but I know what you're saying, that I think we often miss that incredibly important context of the Jewishness of where he came from. And I think we can learn more if we know more about Judaism. We can learn more about the context of our own faith.
Because you can't remove Christianity from Judaism, because Jesus himself said, I am not here to replace Mosaic law, I'm here to fulfill it. So he's himself placing himself within that Jewish context. And I think that's what I did quite like about the Chosen, that it wasn't just like, oh, there was this wise man who lived long ago, he was Jewish. It was it was inherent there, and that was quite nice to see. And then my third point, which I just really wanted to mention, was my favourite scene, was when he heals Eden's mother, and Eden's mother instantly gets out of bed and starts making snacks for everyone. Because it just reminded me of my mum.
That is your mum. That is my mum.
Yeah. My mum could be lying on the floor with the stump of her leg bleeding on the carpet, and she'd still be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry about the mess. Could I make you a cup of tea?" Yeah.
Nat's mum is one of the most hospitable and wonderful women you will ever meet. I remember I've driven down a few hours on a Friday night to come see him, and she come in, "Oh, hi, how you doing? Was the driver okay? Oh, that's fine. Here you go. I've made you a bacon butty. Nat and Matt are upstairs. If you want to just go up and go see him, that's fine." Absolutely adore Christine.
Yeah, I think my mum would adopt you.
Yeah. That sounds good to me.
Yeah. And my dad, actually.
The fact that she was just sort of oblivious, like, what? Why am I in bed? Why is that?
Yes, I love that.
Let's go. Right, come on. Let's crack on. Let's make some food. What are you all doing?
No, I just love that scene. It was a lovely bit of humour.
That wraps up our Finding the Faith in the Film. We have a review, if you can believe it. Over on Facebook. God in Film is an engaging podcast that delves into the fascinating subject of religion in movies. The hosts are two awesome friends who, between them and their guests, provide insightful and nuanced perspectives on how these themes are portrayed in cinema. From Hollywood blockbusters to independent films, they explore the various ways in which filmmakers grapple with questions of God or themes of God versus traditional storytelling. Their discussions are well-informed, thought-provoking and accessible, making them a great listen for both believers and non-believers alike. The podcast production quality is also top-notch. Thank you. Making it a pleasure to listen to. Whether you're a movie buff, a believer, or simply interested in exploring big questions about life and existence, God in Film is a podcast worth checking out. Highly recommended. And that comes from Ben Walker over on Facebook, and we could not love Ben more at this point.
Thank you, Ben.
Okay, that wraps up our much longer than I expected to episode. Nat, Claire, have you had a good time?
Yay! Loved it.
Always.
Fantastic. Okay, ladies and gents, our superhero season will be starting very shortly. For our top tier patrons, you can listen to our Superman episode right now. I really hope you've forgiven me for the April Fool's episode that you had last week. I'm not sorry. I'd do it again. And
I told you no one would get it, Giles.
I don't care. We're still doing it anyway. And I hope you can join us for the rest of our season. Bye. Gordon Film is hosted and created by Giles Gough and
Phil Coleman.
Mixing and editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by
Julie Walsh.
And our theme tune was composed by
Rick Lee.
Waffle editing by
Nick Matthews.
Gordon Film is a Dash production. Please rate and review. Unless it's a 1-star, in which case, crowdfund a multi-part series about the life of Giles and how his ideas are just not that interesting.